بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Can I be heard clearly? And can I be seen clearly? Alhamdulillah. If you could just give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So, alhamdulillah wa shukrillah. Inshallah, this is our usual monthly Living Islam session that we usually do. Usually we do it on Fridays. However, because this is graduation season, I was unavailable to do it yesterday. I had to be present at the graduation for some of our students, and so we switched it to today. And so just as a brief introduction for anyone who may be new to the concept of the Living Islam that we do at the Mecca Center, this is not a dars, this is not a lesson, this is a open session that we do on a monthly basis with some few exceptions. And this is just an open discussion. We come together, and the basis is just to have a platform where people feel free that they can talk about and discuss things that may be prevalent on their minds based upon the different situations that they may find themselves in, or situations that they feel, or different topics that they may feel that they don't otherwise get a chance to talk about or to discuss. And so there is no formal topic. I didn't come prepared with a topic piece, nor is there, we like to say, nor is there anything that's necessarily off limits. However, we just ask that we always keep proper Islamic etiquette in mind. But we try to answer, and we try to talk about whatever it is that, again, may be on people's minds. One of the things I like to say is that this is not a Q&A, so it's not just, ask me questions and I'm going to try to see what answers I come up with or anything like that. It's really supposed to be a discussion, and so it doesn't just have to be me talking. And so anyone that comes on the Zoom session, they can feel free to unmute themselves, and they can join in on the conversation. And so this is typically how we do it. Again, this is a monthly session that we have. And so that is my little introductory spiel, so to speak. So inshallah, I will leave the floor open for anyone who may have something that they want to discuss anything that may be on their minds. And I always put this out there, or we can sit in each other's comfortable or uncomfortable, depending on how you look at it, silence for the next 2 hours or so. And so, but usually what happens is that it takes a little bit for things to kind of get kicked off, so to speak. And so, and but also sometimes, I'm not sure if there were, sometimes people send in either questions or topics that they want to discuss prior to the session starting. So I'm not sure if we have any of those, but alhamdulillah, this is an open session. And so, bismillah. Oh, so I didn't actually see that. So we do have something that someone had sent in prior. And of course, it's something that will be a little bit more possibly difficult, even though I haven't read the whole question. I just read some portions of it. But inshallah, we will see if we know anything in relation to what is being mentioned. So there was a question that was submitted. What are women's rights in Islam, especially in regards to the hijab and ibaya? And another question that we were tagged in. Okay, so it's actually different questions. So the first one, what are women's rights in Islam, especially in regards to the hijab and the ibaya? So the hijab and abaya, these are not necessarily things that you would say are related to women's rights. Generally speaking, when we think of the concept of women's rights, it's more or less the concept of those things that are obligatorily due to a woman based upon the different relationships that she may have, or the rights that she may owe to others in her life, again, based upon the different relationships that she may have. However, when we talk about the concept of hijab or an abaya, this is in a different category that is, you can say, is in relation to the rights that a woman has toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'll start with the abaya because that's the easy one. The abaya itself is not a requirement for women. That if a woman chooses to wear an abaya, that's her personal choice to wear the abaya, and she can choose to wear it, or she can choose to wear something differently. The requirement that both men and women have is that we have certain areas of our bodies that are considered to be our aura, or in English we would say our nakedness. And so those are things that are obligatory for us to cover. And so for a woman, her nakedness extends in more detail than a man's. So a man's aura, his nakedness, is generally speaking considered to be the area between the navel and the knees. Even though this is not considered to be appropriate for example, a man to, walk around without a shirt on, it's still not going to be considered to be his aura as long as the area between the navel and the knees is covered. For the woman, it's a little bit different. For the woman, it's considered to be that her aura is considered to be her entire body, excluding the face and the hands. And there is some difference of opinion in relation to the feet of a woman, where some ulama, they consider that the feet of a woman are still a part of her awrah, while other ulama, they consider that the feet of a woman are not a part of the awrah. So there is some difference of opinion in regards to the feet, but there's general consensus that the face and the hands are excluded. And this gets into the concept of niqab, meaning the face veil that covers the entirety of the face. The scholars, they differ about that as well. Is that some scholars, they do deem it to be an obligation. Other scholars, they deem it to be a sunnah. However, there's not an ijma'. There's not a consensus in relation to whether or not a woman has to wear a face veil. So as long as a woman covers the area that is considered to be her awrah, as long as that area is covered, then that is that is the only obligation that she has. And so the reason why you find many Muslim women wearing an abaya is because it's similar to, for example, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his preference for a long shirt or a qamis is because that is something that is easy to wear, that will more or less cover the majority of the awrah. And so, this is one of the reasons why the Prophet ﷺ, for men, he used to like the long shirt, the qamis, because if you have a long shirt or a qamis or a thobe, is that it covers more or less the entirety of the awrah in that one garment. And so for the abaya, is that it's loose fitting and it covers the bulk of of a woman's nakedness. The reason why I say that is because when we start talking about the hijab, that is going to basically cover up the remainder of a woman's nakedness. And so if a woman decides that she does not want to wear any abaya, then she can wear any other loose-fitting clothing that would still cover her nakedness. So the major point here is that the nakedness be covered. That is the main takeaway, is that as long as the nakedness is covered with loose-fitting clothing that is not see-through, so it shouldn't be such that it can be easily seen through, such that you can see the color of the skin underneath it. Nor should, as we've been saying, loose-fitting, nor should it be tight, especially it should not be skin tight. Unfortunately, we live in a time nowadays where both for men and women, having skin tight or very tight clothing is becoming more and more normative. And so for both men and women, this is not considered to be appropriate dress, is that clothing should be loose-fitting and covering of the necessary body parts. And so the abaya just makes it easy. But again, it's not a requirement. So if a woman, technically speaking, if she wants to wear pants or she wants to wear a dress or something else, as long as her awrah, her nakedness is covered, then that is the requirement. Now, in regards to the hijab is a part of the covering of the awrah, because the hijab is considered to be an obligation in Islam. This is something that is established by way of the Quran. And so this is something that there is ijma' about. There is consensus about the requirement for a woman to wear a hijab such that she covers the remainder of her nakedness that is not going to be covered by, for example, an abaya. And so the hijab itself, actually, it just means a veil. And so the actual material that is usually used for the covering of the remainder of the nakedness is oftentimes in the Arabic language referred to as a khimar, a scarf, essentially. And so with the hijab, it's a requirement that a woman cover the area that is not her face. So the face for both men and women is the area where a normal hairline would start. And so it's not based upon necessarily a person's personal hairline, because some people, they may have a receding hairline, some people, they may have a low hanging hairline, but essentially it's the face limit is where the normative hairline would start for a person, going down to the chin bone, and then going from ear to ear, the cartilage of the ear to the other cartilage of the ear. And so that is the area that is considered to be the face. Now, the thing is that in order to ensure, and particularly for a woman, that because the hair is not going to be included in the in terms of that which is permissible to be seen. So in order to make sure that her hair is covered, is that a woman, for example, she's wearing a hijab, is that she would wear it a little further down to ensure that none of the hairs are able to be seen. And she would make sure that when she has the hijab, that her ears are covered, and then also that the neck is covered. And so that is the purpose of the hijab. Now, the scholars, they differ in terms of the area underneath the chin. So this small area underneath the chin, the scholars, they differ as to whether or not that needs to be covered or not. Some scholars say yes, some scholars say no. So out of abundance of caution, if a woman wanted to be more precautious about it, is that she would also make sure that this area is covered. So for example, in the Shafi school of law, the Shafi ulama, they consider this portion to be the awra as well. And so they would say that the area underneath the chin bone, this area here, also needs to be covered. So those are the requirements in relation to the rights that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has over a woman in terms of the covering of her nakedness. Now, in regards to other rights that a woman has, that's like a whole class series in and of itself. I mean, we can get into that, but there's many different aspects because you have because again, the haqooq that a person has is going to be based upon the relationships that they are in relationship to. So you have haqooq walidain, the haqooq of the walidain, the rights of the parents. You have the haqooq of the siblings. You have the haqooq of the grandparents, the children, the spouse, the neighbor, the employer, the employee, so on and so forth. So it's just, and this is, some of these things are actually not even going to be gender specific. They're just going to be general rights that a person has towards others. So it's just a very general aspect, but since hijab and ibayo specifically mentioned, that's why we talked about those specifically. There was another something else that was mentioned on Facebook, in which someone says, "I'm getting married to a born Muslim, which I'm super excited about." So I'm assuming the person that's writing this is a convert to Islam or possibly from Ahl Kitab. But I feel at lost here because he says it's his responsibility for everything, and I'm not used to that kind of lifestyle. Like I enjoy helping and so forth. He said I can continue to work as long as I wear my hijab at work. He is super protective and doesn't like other men speaking to me for just chat unless it's necessary for work, school, or doctors. How do I get used to the way he does things and wants to take on all the responsibilities? Okay, so that's a good amount to try to unpack. So, some of these things are actual requirements in relation to marriage. So in terms of marriage, and this is one of the areas where this particular verse gets a lot of flack from those who have ill feelings in relation to Islam and so on and so forth, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions in the Quran that الرجال قوامون على النساء, that the men have been given quwwah, an aspect of leadership. And this is not a literal translation, but in terms of essentially the meanings that is coming across is that men have been given a position of leadership over women. And so what that entails is that it's actually the responsibility of a man to take care of his family, and part of his family is going to be the women in his lives. The women in his life. And so that definitively is going to include his wife. So technically speaking, from the standpoint of the basic upkeep of the home, a woman is not responsible for any financial upkeep within the home. And so this does not mean that a man has to provide, quote unquote, a life of luxury, so to speak, but meaning that the basic needs of the home, so that the actual cost of the home itself, the food, and then basic clothing. I mean, if you want to get very specific in terms of a fiqh perspective, is that essentially the fuqaha, they say that a man, in terms of clothing, is only responsible to provide his spouse with enough clothing for the different seasons. So, basically, she has something to wear in the summer, fall, winter, and spring. He doesn't have to provide any more than that. But the basic concept is that the upkeep of the household, in terms of the basic needs of the wife, and then of course the needs of the children, are the financial responsibility of the husband, and so that does not extend to the wife. So the wife is not financially responsible within the household. Now, can she contribute financially to the household? Yes, she can. However, from a Sharia perspective, any financial contribution she would give to the household would, generally speaking, fall into one of two categories depending on her intention. Is that it would either be under the category of sadaqah, as a charity, if she doesn't expect any type of compensation, or it may be a loan, if, for example, she expects to have this money returned to her. So if, for example, a husband, asks his wife to contribute towards the rent, for example, she can say to him that, okay, I will contribute, but I want to be paid back. And that it will be her right to do that. Because again, it's not her right to have to financially provide for the upkeep of the home. So that's one aspect of it. And so, can a woman work? Yes, a woman can work, but it's not her responsibility. And if she chooses not to, she's not in any way in any type of fault or anything like that if she chooses not to. And the husband has the full responsibility. Now, coming from an American Western perspective, then yes, a lot of times we kind of find this a little bit odd in some instances, in the sense that, generally speaking, as Westerners, or specifically Americans, is that oftentimes the concept is that, as the saying will go, we just go Dutch on everything. Is that, she pays half the rent, she pays half the grocery bills, she pays half the utility bills, so on and so forth. We just, she works, I work, and we split it down the middle. But that's not the Islamic concept of how a house is ran. A house is ran where the husband provides the financial support of the family, and then the woman, her primary responsibility is towards her husband and her children. So, from the standpoint of Islam, we understand that just like in any other organization, you have different roles that people have with different responsibilities to those roles. Similarly, the household is another form of an organization. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they have given us the criterion as to what are the things that each person within the household will be responsible for. And so, as I mentioned, is that the primary responsibility that a woman would have in the household would be towards her husband as well as towards her children. And so, and even in that, there's limits to that. And so a woman is not expected to be, just a servant to her husband. Like, if you want me to get technical, in the Shafi school, the way that they define the rights that a woman has towards her husband is basically two things. Is that in general, she makes herself available to her husband in terms of physical intimacy, meaning that she doesn't refuse him without good reason, so to speak. And secondly, is that she doesn't allow for anyone to enter into his home that he does not wish to be in his home. From the standpoint of the Shafi method, that's pretty much the two main priorities, or the two main responsibilities that a woman has towards her husband. And so if you see there, like, nothing there says that she has the responsibility to cook for him or to clean for him or to, do this or do that. And so technically speaking, if a woman were to do those two things, more or less, there's a little bit more to it, is that she would, technically speaking, have fulfilled her rights towards her husband. However, one of the things I usually always say to people is that having a good marriage is not something that you take from a fiqh book. Like, you don't take your marriage criterion from a book of Islamic law, because the books of Islamic law, what they are giving us is that they're giving us the minimums and maximums of how it is that we're supposed to go about our lives. So they're not there to say that this is the ideal things to do. They're saying that this is the bare minimum that you can do, meaning that you can't go below this. It's not saying that this is the area that you just stay in. It's saying that you should not go below this. And it also, in some instances, will say that this is the maximum. That meaning that you cannot go above this. It's not saying that you should do that, but it's saying that you should not go above this. And generally speaking, the actual sunnah, the actual way of doing something is going to be somewhere in the middle. And so, even though I'm mentioning these things, I don't want people to get confused as if I'm saying that this is the way that you should run your home, or that this is the way that you should interact with your spouse, or whatever the case may be. Is that, these are things where the Sharia is giving us the limits and saying not to transgress those limits. But it's not a situation where we should necessarily say that this is the way that we should run our home. So, as I mentioned before, is that, from the standpoint of a sacred law, is that a man, only needs to provide his wife, for example, with, basically one pair of clothing for each of the 4 seasons. I would never tell any man to only give your wife, or, only, buy your wife one pair of clothing for all 4 seasons and just be like, oh yeah, well, that's all I got to do. Like, again, the sacred law is giving us limits. It's not saying that this is the way that we should do things. If we, in order to see how we should do things, then we should look at the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because he was the best of example. He was the uswatun hasana. He had the most beautiful example. And so that is the example that we should look at in terms of how we should interact with our spouse, with our children, and so on and so forth. So that's one aspect of it, is that, yes, financially, a woman is not responsible. But again, if she wants to contribute to the household, she can. But if the husband says that he doesn't want for her to contribute to the household, that he's going to take care of it, then she can choose to spend her wealth in other ways. She can give it to, different charities, or give it as sadaqah. She can save it up and use it as a gift to take the family on an Umrah trip or Hajj or something like that, or whatever other means that she may find to use that wealth with. And so that's one aspect. The other aspect is the aspect of, like, having other men talking. So the thing is that this is something else that, coming from a Western perspective, requires a bit of nuance, because I remember when I was studying the fiqh of nikah, the fiqh of marriage, with one of my teachers from the Hanafi perspective. And one of the things that he emphasized to us in that particular class is that he mentioned how the default relationship between man and woman is haram, except in the case where there's a ilal, where there's a proof that would determine otherwise. So what do I mean by that? So meaning that from a sacred law perspective, a man and a woman don't have a permissible relationship, meaning that there cannot be unrestricted interaction between them, except in the case that there is a sacred law evidence that would say otherwise. So some of these are just kind of like natural things that, basically everyone recognizes. So for example, birth is one of those things. So for example, a person's mother, I need the woman that gave birth to you, or your siblings, meaning that you share the same birth mother, or excuse me, or your aunts or uncles by blood, meaning the brother and sister of your mother or father, and so on and so forth. So there's birth that is a evidence that will remove this impermissibility between, in the relationship between men and women. Then there's marriage. And so marriage also lifts it. And so not only when two people become married are they now permissible for each other, but again, this is only after the marital contract has been established, but also there are other relationships that now become permissible. So your mother-in-law and father-in-law, and then of course that's going to be reciprocal. So your son-in-law and daughter-in-law, they all now also become permissible in terms of having a, you can kind of say like a more laid back relationship with them. Also in relation to wet nursing. So meaning that if a young baby, particularly a child before reaching the age of 2 lunar years, if they suckle from a woman other than their mother, that also forms this relationship. So the thing is, what I'm saying is that from a Sharia perspective, there is the basic concept that there is no relationship between a man and a woman if there's not a Sharia continence to say that there needs to be a relationship. And so there is a basis to what your potential husband is saying in terms of is that all other relationships that we have with the opposite gender are supposed to be on an as needed basis. So what that means is that, when people ask the question like, can men and women be friends? In particular, like when we're talking about can men and women be friends from the standpoint of Islam? The general default question is going to be no. And part of the understanding that we have from that is that even from a Western perspective, I just had recently looked at something that I had seen some years ago that I had saved, where it was talking about the concept, not from a religious standpoint, but just from a social standpoint. It was talking about the concept of, can men and women just be platonic friends? Meaning that, can you have a man and a woman who are only friends and nothing more? And they did a survey of both men and women. And what they found is that for about 80% or so of the women, it might even been a little bit more. I don't remember what the statistics said specifically, but the overwhelming majority of the women who were surveyed, they said yes. And some of them, like, mentioned, like, I do have, platonic friends and so on and so forth. And then when they did that same survey with men, they asked the same question, and 80% or more of the men said what? They said no. And when I was looking at the survey more recently, they actually mentioned in that survey that for most of the men in that survey, they were actually hoping that they would eventually develop a romantic relationship with their female friends that were just friends at the moment. So like, I mean, right now. Sorry about that. So they were saying how, excuse me, I was saying how I used to say to sisters sometimes is that, one of the worst things that you could say to a man who is not your mahram, meaning that he's not a part of your unmarriageable kin, and that's the men that we mentioned, like a father or a brother or something like that, is that one of the worst things that you can say to a man who was your quote unquote friend is that you're just like my brother, or like you're I really value you as a friend. Like basically, I'm sure some of you have probably heard of the concept of like being put into the friend zone. Like the reality of it, and I'm telling the women, like the reality of it for many women out there, any man that you have as a friend, he's only there because you won't let him do anything else. and he's not going to try to ruin at least the friendship that he has. But deep down inside, he actually has hopes of going further than that. I'm being completely honest. And this is something that we have from our religion as well. The Prophet Muhammad SAW, he very clearly stated it. He said that there's no time that a man and a woman are ever alone together except that the shaitan is a third party. And I've did my own testing with this. I've asked, different men that I've known in my life um, this simple question, not necessarily Muslim, and I asked them. It's like, I didn't necessarily ask them for them to tell me their personal answers, but I asked them, just to kind of like get them thinking of it. I was like, have you ever been alone in this? Have you ever been in a situation where you've been alone with a woman and a intimate thought did not come across your mind? And for the most part, pretty much every one of them, for the most part, there's probably a few exceptions, and even then, I can't necessarily guarantee that they were fully telling the truth, but for the most part, it was a no. Is that part of the nature of men is that we are physical, even from the standpoint of when I've done, one second. Sorry about that. But yeah, I mean, but the basic concept is that men are physical. Even if you ask the majority of men, married men, what was it that attracted you to your spouse? And I can almost guarantee, at least from my experience when I've done this, basically 80, 95, whatever the percentage is, like the overwhelming majority of them is always the first thing is how she looked. It's not to say that that was like the only decision maker, but how she looked was of the most important aspects of him, him choosing her as a spouse. This is, even the Prophet Muhammad SAW, he mentioned this, is that before getting married, is that, two people should look at one another, to make sure that they're attracted to one another. And this is, even more significant for men because I've asked the same question with women, and I've had women who have informed me, for example, that uh, the husband that they have, the thing that attracted them to him was not his looks. Like I've even had some sisters who would actually say that, he wasn't even my type, or it was everything, almost like everything but his looks, so to speak. So this is all to say is that men were very physical, and and so the Sharia, as I like to say to people, like for example, I'm not going to try to put anyone on the spot, but I know that some of our very kind and beneficial administrators are with us, and I know that some of them are married, and I'm not going to put them on the spot. It's just, if they choose to answer it. But like, for example, if I would have asked some of the administrators or even some of the people who are online who are married of the sisters, like, what attracted you to your husband? Any of the sisters want to chime in? Or, like I said, I'm not going to try to force you. And I said to put in the chat, so this way, like, your husband doesn't necessarily have to know it was you saying that it was something other than his looks that attracted you to him. No volunteers? Okay. All right. Like I said, I'm not going to try to force anyone. But like I said, from previous experience that I have had when sisters have answered, oftentimes it's something other than their looks, and I'm not even excluding myself from that. I'm sure if I probably asked my wife, what made her attracted to me, it probably would not necessarily be my looks. But I say all that to say, going back to the initial question in relation to like workplace and things like that, is that if I were to ask the question, does anyone that's presently here with us online today, even if you heard me say it before, does anyone know the number one place where extramarital affairs begin? Anyone know? The number one place where extramarital affairs begin? No one knows, or no one wants to try to answer, just in case they might be wrong. Is that it? No one knows. So I guess I'll answer that one too. So the number one place where extramarital affairs actually begin is the workplace, either work or school. Work or school, and then number three is the gym. So those are the top two or three, however you want to put it, places where extramarital affairs begin. And so part of the reason why the workplace and school are such a easy place for extramarital affairs to begin is because these are people that you're interacting with on a regular basis, and you can oftentimes kind of like let your guard down, so to speak, when you're around them. So you can start talking about more personal matters. You can start having more joking conversations and so on and so forth. And so this is why, from an Islamic standpoint, is that generally speaking, like if you go to more traditional Islamic societies, you actually will find is that they do have a complete separation of the genders. I remember when I was studying in Yemen, one of my teachers, Hafidhullah, may Allah preserve him, it was me and another brother who was from the UK. We were in the class together, and our teacher was asking us about, going to school in the West and so on and so forth. And one of the things he had asked us, he was like, "How do you go to class with women in it?" Like, like like he just like him growing up in Yemen in a more conservative area, where the sense of modesty is very high. He just really couldn't fathom, being a teenager going to class with women mixed in with you. Like he's just like, for him that was just like too much of a temptation. Not from the standpoint of so I want to make sure that this is definitely clear. Not from the standpoint of me, because my teacher, I consider him to be of the utmost of the righteous, but just to show you how pure his heart is in terms of his righteousness, is that the concept of like just freely mixing between the genders is just something like it's just something that he just really can't really fathom, that that's just too much temptation to be there. And the thing is that we can see it is that how many extramarital affairs happen and so on and so forth. And so the way that many of the ulama, they look at it is that it's not a situation where we can completely separate ourselves from the rest of society. So the way that the ulama, they frame it is that from the standpoint of having to live within the society, but at the same time trying to keep up Islamic etiquette in relation to it, is that yes, we should try to have a situation where we interact with the opposite gender on an as needed basis. So It's not to say that we have to be like extra stern or mean towards people of the opposite gender, but we should keep everything professional. We should, and this is part of the reason why we don't have, the shaking of the hands between the genders and so on and so forth. Alhamdulillah, shukrillah, I have had three, four, five, I've had 5 different jobs within the last however many years. It's been a while. I've been working for a while now, but I've had at least 5 different jobs. And alhamdulillah, I can say that, in all the jobs that I've had since graduating from college, that have been full-time job opportunities, I've never shaken any woman's hand. That, but that is from the standpoint of Islamic etiquette, is that, just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us to lower the gaze in terms of looking at the opposite gender. Similarly, it's like, if we're not supposed to look at the opposite gender without lowering our gaze, then, a priority, we shouldn't be physically having contact with the opposite gender. And so these are all, different things that need to be taken into consideration. So when we interact with people of the opposite gender at work or school or these type of things, yes, we should keep it professional. Yes, we can still be nice. We can still, ask how they're doing, or, say good morning, or, whatever the case may be, but keep it professional. Don't, I try to make it a personal thing where I only save a woman's phone in my phone if it's like something absolutely necessary. Like if I actually have to have this person's phone, this person's phone number. Why? Because I don't need, there's no reason for me to have, a woman's phone number in my phone. That is someone that I don't have to necessarily interact with. And so, yes, this is not necessarily the normative way that we go about things from an American standpoint, but these are considered to be proper Islamic etiquettes. And all these things are preventatives from leading up to the haram. So as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger of Allah, they have mentioned to us, is that not only are we to stay away from the haram, but we're supposed to stay away from those things that can even lead to the haram. That's, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about zina, He talks about fornication, He doesn't just say don't commit fornication. What does He say? He says don't even come near to it. And generally speaking, the first thing that happens that leads to zina is a conversation. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's telling us in the Quran very clearly, don't even come near to it. Why? Because it's a fitan. It's a trial, it's a tribulation. This is kind of like a follow-up question to the question that was mentioned earlier in relation to a woman working and contributing. So it says, what if a woman makes more income than her husband, and so her income is necessary? Then again, it will still fall under the category of either a loan or sadaqah. So even if a woman makes more money than her husband, her responsibility is not for the upkeep of the household. So if she contributes to the household, that is a good deed on her part. And if she wants to make it a sadaqah such that he does not have to pay her back, then that's even further good deed. If she wants to make it a loan so that whenever he may be financially in a position to pay her back, that he will, then she could do that as well. So the responsibility does not shift. It's just to say that, so again, it's not to say that the woman can't contribute. It's just to say that it's not her responsibility to contribute. The financial responsibility is towards the husband. The husband has the financial responsibility in the household. So she contributes, then that's going to be a good deed on her part, either on means of sadaqah, or again, if she wants to make it a loan, she can make it a loan and say, for example, when you're able to make more of a financial contribution, then you can pay me back, what it is that I contributed to the upkeep of the household. There was another something else that someone mentioned. I recently moved to Far Rockaway, Queens, New York. What is the best way to find out if there's a mosque where I live, and also, if so, if available for women to go to? When I used to work in the prison system, inmates would be leaving, and sometimes they would be going to all types of areas that they never have been to, and or sometimes they may have converted to Islam in prison, and so they have no idea of the Muslim community, even in the neighborhoods that they grew up in. So what I used to usually tell them is that there's a website and or app, whichever one you want to use. But there's a website called zabiha.com, zabihah.com. Like I said, there's also an app. Now the thing is that it's primarily was created for finding out areas where there are halal restaurants. However, they provide information in relation to Islamic food markets as well as masajid. So the beneficial thing about Zabiya.com is that you can type in your zip code or just your address or whatever the case may be, and you have different categories. So if you go to the category where it mentions mosque, you can see the different masajids that are within your area, and you can also see, I guess you could, for lack of a better way of putting it, like the denomination of the masjid. So like you can see if it's a Shiite masjid, you can see if it's a Sunni masjid, so on and so forth. And you can go from there to kind of see if they have um, facilities for women and so on and so forth. So that's why I usually advise for people when they're moving into a new area is Zabiha.com or just the Zabiha app. They work fairly well at letting people know what Islamic resources they have available. Because again, not only like its primary use was supposed to be for Islamic restaurants, or should I say halal restaurants, but it also includes grocery stores, masajid, and so on and so forth. So that's what I usually recommend for people. Wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sister Fatima. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless you as well. What are some of the recommended acts one should do during Dhul Hijjah? Also, is a household responsible for more than one qurbani if more than one person is working in that household? So, from the first question, in relation to Dhul Hijjah is part of the sacred months. And so we are right now likely leaving the sacred month of Dhul Qa'dah. For some of the countries that have already had Maghrib come in, they have already announced that they're going to begin Dhul Hijjah tomorrow. If I'm not mistaken, Saudi Arabia has announced that Dhul Hijjah is going to start from tomorrow. And more than likely, for America, is that Dhul Hijjah will start from tomorrow. But Dhul Qa'dah is also one of the sacred months. And so basically anything that we understand to be a good deed is recommended to do during these times. And so not just with Dhul Hijjah, but also Dhul Qa'dah. And then right after that will come Muharram, which is the last of the sacred months that come in succession. So you have three sacred months that come in succession. You have Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, and Muharram. And then you have one that comes on its own, which is Rajab. However, excuse me, during the month of Dhul Hijjah, there are certain things that a person either will be required to do or be recommended to do. So in relation to those things that are recommended to do during Dhul Hijjah, one of the things that's recommended is to fast in the month of Dhul Hijjah. In particular, if a person is able to, it's recommended to fast even all of the first 9 days of Dhul Hijjah. So essentially, if we're going to make the safe assumption that Dhul Hijjah will start from tomorrow, that a person would start from tomorrow and they would fast all the way up until the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, meaning that they would not fast the 10th of Dhul Hijjah because that is Yom Eid. And so it's not permissible to fast on Yom Eid. And then also it would not be permissible to fast the 3 days after Eid. And those are referred to as Ayyam Tashriq. So it would be recommended to fast the first 9 days of Dhul Hijjah. If a person is not able to fast all 9 days, then at bare minimum, it's recommended to fast the day of Arafah, which is the 9th day of Dhul Hijjah. So, so if a person is not able to fast all 9 days, then at least to fast the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, which is the Yom Arafah. And this is recommended particularly for those who are not on Hajj. That for the Hujjaj, it's not necessarily recommended for them to fast on while they're on Hajj due to the difficulty of it. And anyone that's ever been on Hajj, you pretty much know that you kind of like not even necessarily thinking about fasting while you're on Hajj. It can be a very difficult time, and then to add on fasting on top of that, it could be very difficult. But then after that, any good that you can think of. So giving in sadaqah, giving in charity, that is considered to be highly recommended during these days. Getting up for tahajjud, because these are considered to be the best days and nights outside of anything else. Like basically, the only night that competes with these 10 nights is Laylatul Qadr, because these are nights that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by in the Quran. So in Surah Al-Fajr, in the Quran, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Wal Fajr, wa layalin ashr, that he says he swears by the Fajr, by the dawn, and the 10 nights. The ulama, if you look in the tafsir, they mention that the 10 nights are considered to be the 10 nights of Dhul Hijjah. And so to get up during these nights and pray tahajjud and to recite Quran and to make dua and any other good deed that we can think of, that is all recommended. To spend time with one's family, to reconcile between either people we may have enmity with, or to try to reconcile between people that we know that have enmity towards each other. To increase in your Islamic knowledge, to visit the sick, to give food to those who are in a state of food insecurity. Like essentially, you want to maximize as much good as you can during these days. Also, one of the ways of accomplishing this as well is to minimize and ideally completely remove acts of disobedience. So the more that a person can remove ma'asi, that is something that is its own benefit in of itself. So even if a person is not necessarily able to increase in doing good deeds, one of the things that a person can do is to try to remove any type of bad deeds that they may have, or character traits that they have, or any other thing that they may have within them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us that He does not like, or is possibly even disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are all things that we can do during these days to try to maximize our benefit from these days. So essentially, again, anything that you can think of as being good deeds, this is what we want to do. Fasting is being of the most. Now the thing is, I've been holding off on talking about Qurban for two reasons. One is because the question mentioned it specifically, but something else is that in relation to Qurbani, the ulama, they differ as to whether Qurbani is a sunnah mu'akkada, meaning emphasized sunnah, or is it a wajib. So some ulama, they consider it to be a sunnah mu'akkada. So for example, in the Shafi'i school, Qurbani is considered to be a sunnah mu'akkada. So it means that a person, if they are able to, they should slaughter. So in the Shafi'i school, it's considered to be makruh. It's considered to be disliked for a person that is able to slaughter to not slaughter. In the Hanafi school, they actually consider it to be a wajib, meaning essentially that it's an obligation, meaning that if a person has the ability to slaughter and they don't, then they will actually be sinful. So there's a difference of opinion about whether or not we consider the slaughter of the qurbani to either be a emphasized sunnah or a obligation. So essentially, it's something that we should not miss if we have the ability to do so. And so the sunnah or the obligation of qurbani is based upon individual's capacity. And so we see, so this is different from, like, for example, zakat al-fitr, where, for example, zakat al-fitr is paid by the head of the household. With qurbani, that this is something that is not necessarily just for the head of the household. This is for whoever has the means to be able to slaughter. So in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he had told his daughter Fatima that she should go and see her slaughter being slaughtered that she paid for, because it wasn't something where the women would go and slaughter the sheep on their own. What they would do is that they would pay for someone to slaughter on their behalf. And so the Prophet ﷺ was informing Fatima that even though she's paid someone to do it on her behalf, she should still go and see it be done. And so with the qurbani, it's not something where it's something just for the head of the household, but for example, if a woman has the financial means to be able to purchase her own sacrificial animal, then she should do so. So with qurbani, it's just a difference of opinion in relation to whether or not it's an obligation or if it's an emphasized sunnah. Essentially, at the end of the day, it's something where anyone who has the ability to do so, they should not leave it. It's something that it's a very meritorious action. And again, some ulama, they actually consider it to be a requirement if a person is financially capable of doing so. However, if a person is going to make the intention to do so, then the sunnah is that you do not trim or cut your hair or your nails until your animal is actually slaughtered. It's that this is our portion for those of us who are not able to go on Hajj for that year. This is part of our portion of connecting to the Hujjaj. Is that just for the Hujjaj, it's forbidden for them to cut or trim their nails. For the person that's not on Hajj and they intend to slaughter, they should not as well trim or cut their nails and their hair until their animal is actually slaughtered. So that's something to keep in mind if a person does have the intention to slaughter. And so for those of us who are in America, if you intend to slaughter, you know, you might want to go ahead and cut your nails and trim your hair or whatever the case may be, so that you don't necessarily get inclined to do it because you haven't. So yeah, this again. So even the cutting of the hair and the nails also apply to men and women. So anyone that has the intention, if you have the intention to slaughter, then you should not cut your hair or your nails until your animal is slaughtered. And so again, that's why it's recommended to take care of that grooming before the Hijjah begins. I thought it was haram for women to cut cut her hair. No, it's not haram for women to cut their hair. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ, he recommended for women not to cut all of their hair, meaning like to shave the hair off or to cut it extremely short. But even then, it's not haram. But it's recommended for a woman to keep her hair to the extent that she's able to. A part of a woman's beauty is her hair. So it's recommended that a woman not cut it extremely short, but if she's going to trim it or something like that, then that's perfectly fine. Now, for the person that's on Hajj, then or even Umrah, then yes, it does become haram for them to cut their hair. But that is specific to the people who are in a state of ihram. Yeah, and if you're able to, it's also good to see if you can do a khatam of the Quran during the month of Dhul Hijjah, meaning that by the time that the month of Dhul Hijjah finishes, if you're able to complete the recitation of the Quran or complete the listening of the recitation of the Quran. A person can do either one. Reciting it on your own, it carries extra reward because you're the one that's doing it and you're using more of your limbs in order to be able to do so. However, even if a person were to listen to the entirety of the Quran being recited, that's also an act of ibadah. And so that's also something that a person could strive to do in the month of the Hijjah as well, is to try to see if they can complete a khatam, a complete recitation of the Quran, or a complete listening of the recitation of the Quran. And it's, for people who may not have necessarily tried it or feel that they're not necessarily capable of it, um, it's it can it can be more feasible than people may think. Um, so, for example, a person who is able to read the Arabic, they're able to read and they have a fluency in reading. Generally speaking, um, many people can, if they are fluent in Arabic, they can read a page in about a minute and a half to 2 minutes, or a minute and a half to 2.5 minutes per page. And if you multiply that by 20 pages, then we were talking about anywhere from a half hour um, to to about 50 minutes. And so that's not that long of time. You're talking about less than an hour. And from prior experience with different people, one of the easiest and the best times of recitation of the Quran is around Fajr time, whether it be before Fajr or it be right after Fajr. And generally speaking, that is because, for one, this is a time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about in the Quran specifically, Inna Quran Fajri kana mashhuda, that verily the Quran at Fajr is witnessed. And what the ulama mention about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that it is witnessed is that the angels are present. And so there's a sense of tranquility and a sense of ease of doing acts of worship in these times. And so, as I said, we've experienced that this is probably one of the easiest times to, in particular, do recitation of the Quran. And this is a time where, for many people, especially now in the summer, we haven't even begun to start our days, and we are in a state of not being busied with our phones and other distractions and things that go on during the day. And so if a person is able to take this, half hour to 50 minutes, depending on their capacity, and they're able to read the Quran, they can finish a juice within that time, and they do that for 29 or 30 days, then inshallah they'll be able to finish the Quran. And then for the person that may not be able to read the Quran, then they can, listen to the Quran, and they can take that 30 minutes, half hour. And then for a person that's going to be listening to recitation of the Quran, it may be a little bit easier because you can just divide up the time itself based upon the recording to see, how much you would have to listen to. The one thing I will say is, something that we mentioned, I think it was in the last Living Islam that we did, is that just don't listen to the Quran as kind of like a background music, so to speak. That try to have a time when you can dedicate to really trying to focus on listening to the Quran being recited. Even if you don't necessarily understand the Arabic, again, there's a language that the hearts understand that goes beyond the lisan. It goes beyond the tongue. So the Quran is the greatest of speech because it's the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it connects to the heart even if a person doesn't necessarily understand the Arabic. So I've been shown a question. It says, under Sharia law, what happens to the vote? What happens to freedom of speech? Answer that. So it seems like the person is someone that has a negative view of Islam. But tamam, if a person wants to know. So from the standpoint of Sharia law, there's no problem with the concept of a vote. It's just that there's nothing that says that you necessarily have to give a vote. And there's some situations where a vote is not even necessarily truly feasible. So for example, one of the examples that one of my teachers gives all the time is that we talked about it before, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he set up the family as an organization where different people have their different responsibilities within the family. And so one of the positions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given in the home is that the husband and or father, he is the leader of that family. He is the imam of that family. And so he should consult his family, and this is the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, is that he used to consult his wives in terms of different matters that he was engaged in. But at the end of the day, when the decision needed to be made, he ultimately made the final decision. And the reason I'm mentioning that is that, if we want to say that, well, everything should be based upon a vote, then if you have a husband and wife and each one just gets one vote, then what's going to happen? Oh, I vote for this, well, I vote for that. Oh, okay, so what are we going to do? Yeah, we're just going to be at a stalemate. And even from the standpoint of practicality, that's not how the real world works. Is that you look at any successful organization, there is always a clear understanding of who is in what position. And so, again, it's not to say that Islam doesn't recognize the aspect of voting. For example, the way that the third caliph, Uthman bin Affan, the way that he was chosen was based upon a vote. Is that Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he gathered up certain of the Sahaba that he considered to be the most capable of taking on the leadership role, and he told them to vote amongst themselves as to who was going to be the next caliph. And so, it's not this. So the thing is that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he did not set an established way of establishing different forms of leadership and so on and so forth. Some things are set in stone, meaning, so again, from the family structure, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already set that in stone. and so on and so forth. So yes, there are certain things where the leader is necessarily known. However, other areas, there's nothing to say that you can't necessarily vote. Now, in terms of the concept of freedom of speech, I would say that even in America, people are struggling to understand what constitutes freedom of speech. And so, from a standpoint of sacred law, you know, Islamically, we don't have a concept of like people just have absolute freedom of speech. Like you could just say whatever, whenever. Is that, and so if a person is upset that Islam doesn't necessarily allow for people to just have the freedom to say whatever, whenever, then that is their that is their issue essentially. But the thing is that it understands the power that words have. Some of us we've grown up with the saying like, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, and these type of things. But words cause many problems. And so yes, the sacred law does put limits on what people can say, particularly what people can say in a public space, because that can have true ultimate consequences. And this is one of the things that I try to point out to people from the standpoint of the Islamic law, is that Islamic law ultimately is looking out for the person's ultimate best interest. And their ultimate best interest has nothing to do with this world, but it has everything to do with the next world. So essentially what we're saying is that we're trying to save people from hell. And so as one of our teachers had mentioned, is that, look, if you as an individual want to go to hell, you have every right to do so. Like, if an individual person says that I want to go to hell, if an individual person says that he wants to go to hell, that is his personal right to do so. Like that is between him and his Lord. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide him away from having those type of thoughts. However, that person does not have the right to try to take other people with him. So yes, so from the standpoint of the sacred law, we don't say that a person can just say anything that they want. That, for example, if a person is going to try to convince someone of something that will lead them to hellfire, then yes, the sacred law is going to say like, no, you can't publicly preach that. You can't publicly say that, and so on and so forth. But again, the concept of freedom of speech is something, again, that even America struggles to try to reconcile. That yes, it's written in the Constitution that we're supposed to have freedom of speech, but the thing is that even still, that's not the case. I work at a university. I don't have absolute freedom of speech. I can't say whatever I want to say. So even American society doesn't have a concept of like absolute freedom of speech. It likes to say that, but when it comes down to the ultimate reality of things, it doesn't actually have that implementation. But Islam is just more direct with it. It's like, no, from Islamic law standpoint, there is not a concept of like absolute free speech. There are some aspects of free speech that a person has, but it's not an absolute. In particular, when you're saying things that can lead people to their ultimate destruction, that is when the sacred law really draws the line. But if this was coming from like a combative standpoint, then more than likely the person is probably not even paying attention to it and is still going to have whatever negative concepts that they have about Islam. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide their hearts. We don't we don't try to think ill of any person, because as our teachers would say, is that even people who are hostile towards Islam and are not Muslim, you can look at them in different ways. Like you can look at them as like, oh, this is just a kafir, this is just an infidel, a disbeliever, whatever the case may be. But you can also look at them from the standpoint of this is a potential believer. I remember when we were still meeting in person at the Mecca Center in New York, I remember I asked this question to, we had a good group with us at that particular time, and I asked this question. I was like, how many people were Muslim 10 years ago? And you didn't have that many hands go up. And then I asked another question. I said, how many people actually hated Islam before they became Muslim? And you had, some hands that went up. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that can guide hearts. And so just because a person may speak ill about Islam, or they say that they hate Islam, or they say, oh, how can Islam say this or do that, or whatever the case may be, that 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 should not be a reason that we shouldn't still want good for that person, that we shouldn't still try to be a means of calling that person to what we would consider to be is their ultimate salvation and their ultimate benefit. And so, I don't try to get into debates and polemics and things like that with people, but at the same time, I'm not going to shy away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam have legislated, because at the end of the day, they know best. We're all just trying to figure things out, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's already given us the blueprint, the Quran and the Sunnah of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, you see all the issues that we have when we just try to use our own man-made systems and trying to go about things. All the different, contradictions and chaos and so on and so forth, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's already given us the blueprint to our ultimate success. And that ultimate success is not even in this world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's given us the blueprint for ultimate success in the world that lasts forever, and the akhirah. So, you know, people will always have issues with Islam. As we know, أكثرهم لا يؤمنون. Most of them will not believe. But we still, pray that even if it's just this one person, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides them to Islam. Or, as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned with like the people of Ta'if, is that maybe that from their loins will come those that believe in Allah and His Messenger ﷺ. That maybe this person that wrote this comment, again, if it was coming from the standpoint of hostility, that maybe this person may never believe, but inshallah, maybe from their offspring, there will be people who accept Islam.
Hey, Assalamualaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yes, greetings to you and everyone. It's good to be here again. Speaking of offspring, what is your thoughts in regards to bringing offspring or taking offspring to Umrah, even if they're like not really excited? Like, like you got teenagers and they're like, I don't really want to go. And I asked that as an American because what I noticed is when I went, like there were kids there from other cultures that kind of just seemed like they came because mom and dad say you gotta come. But like in America or maybe in my community, it's like, oh, alhamdulillah, you only get called if it's, not everybody gets called to do it. And I'm just like, okay. And then when I went, I noticed that, there were kids there. It was beautiful, even though they probably, I shouldn't say they weren't that excited, but you know, I was like, is this a cultural thing? Or, yeah, what's your thoughts on
Uh,
that?
any means that we can give our children to connect to the religion and to have a ability to see the sha'ir, to see the sacred signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should always, try to take advantage of those opportunities. Because, for many children, whether they're teenagers or young adults or like whatever the categories that like we usually break up youth in America, because essentially from the standpoint of sacred law, you're a child, then you're an adult. Yani, like once you hit puberty, technically from the sacred law standpoint, you're an adult. But I mean, from our cultural aspect, we go through these different phases. But the thing is that one of the one of the basic aspects of being a youth is that you usually are in a position where you think you know everything. And then also, you're very much influenced by peers and so on and so forth. And so, oftentimes, you don't even necessarily realize the benefits of things that you may have in your life until much later on. And so, if a teenager or a young adult, whatever the case may be, has the opportunity to go on Umrah, and even if they don't understand like what is the significance of this, or like I don't want to go, I wanted to go to the beach, or I want to go this place or that place, that inshallah ta'ala, that will just be, what we're trying to do is plant the seed so that inshallah ta'ala eventually we can continue to nurture it so that eventually it will start to bear fruit. Now, it could be that it's not going to be until 10 years from now, but we want to have those seeds planted so that eventually, inshallah, hopefully they will take root into the our children. Because one of the things that going to Umrah does is that, for one, particularly if someone is coming from a non-Muslim country where Muslims are the overwhelming minority, is that it gives a person a sense of now finding yourself and being in a majority situation where you can actually, and then like, even when you're going on Umrah, you still have a large amount of people that are there. And so you're seeing all these people from all over the world who are all Muslim. And so now it kind of gives you a different perspective. It's almost like having like that Malcolm X type of moment, so to speak, where it's like you're seeing people from all different types of backgrounds and ethnicities, all believing in the same religion, all believing in the same God, all praying in the same direction. Not to mention that, standing in front of the Kaaba, like, it's one thing that, you have your parents telling you, okay, you have to pray Fajr, you have to pray Dhuhr, whatever case may be. And like, we know that we have to face this way when we pray and so on and so forth. But it's a whole nother thing to stand in front of the Kaaba. So the thing is that with children, yes, there are going to be different things where they're not necessarily going to understand the benefit of it. But what we're trying to do is that we're trying to plant those seeds. That, yes, okay, you may not really understand why I'm making you do this. Like, I mean, even from the standpoint, like, even if we go outside of religion, like, how many of us who are parents, for example, didn't understand why our parents were the way that they were? Like, why does she do that? Why does he do that? Why do my parents say that? Why do they do so on and so forth? And then all of a sudden, when we have our own children, we're just like, oh, God, I know why now. Like, why? Because you don't have that experience yet. Like, again, the aspect of being young is that there's a state of ignorance, or should I say a large state of ignorance that goes there. Like, and the, children, they have to grow and have these experiences. But again, as a parent, we want to tailor those experiences. So meaning that we want to set the healthy limits. So like they're not going to extremes. In particular, within our homes, part of the responsibility of the father in particular, but even the mother also has a similar responsibility, is that we don't allow for the haram and things like that to take place in the home, and we ensure that the obligations are being fulfilled in the home. But again, it's giving them that basic structure. So as one of my teachers will put it, is that as long as we give our children, inshallah, as long as we give our children the basic foundations that they need, is that even if they have their little time in the dunya, like, they kind of stray a little bit in the dunya, is that eventually that foundation will catch up to them. It's kind of like an anchor for a ship. It's like, why you put an anchor down with a ship is so that the ship won't go but so far into the water until it's, brought back. And so something like Umrah, that is a major, because even if for nothing else, is that you would hope that even from the standpoint of your child realizing the sacrifice that you make as a parent to be able to take them on Umrah. Like, Umrah is not a cheap trip. That's, at at a at a good price, if you could find it for like $1,200, that's like, amazing. But generally speaking, it's going to be at least 3,000. So even just from the standpoint of like having a sense of gratefulness that your parents would make that sacrifice to try to help you in terms of your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by taking you on Umrah. And that, eventually they can, hopefully understand is that not, many children have that. Like, for example, when I was a teenager, I never went to Umrah. Like, my mother just went to Umrah for the first time 2 years ago or something like that. So, so even from that standpoint, that hopefully that they would even see the benefit that they had a situation where their parents were able to take them for Umrah. So, yeah. So, I mean, there are certain things that with children, like, yes, we want to do things in religion on their own accord. We want them to love the religion, but, there are certain things it's like, yeah, I'm just going to force you to do it, like, whether you like it or not. And I'm
Shukran.
hoping
I
that you,
really, yeah, I needed to hear that because I was just about to just, I don't say give up, but it's just like, what's putting in your head is like, oh, you go to Umrah, you go to Hajj, you can't ever do this again, you can never do that again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my teenagers are not, I mean, inshallah, I'm not, I ain't buy a ticket yet, but just to have the thought in my head, like, it'd be great instead of going on vacation to Hawaii, put that money towards just scooping them up and taking them over to, to make Umrah. But
yeah,
who's to say they're not going to, still listen to the, haram music. And like I said, when I went there, I have boys and they're teenagers. I'm seeing boys of other persuasions from other places with their Yeezys on, with their dreads. And I'm like, wait, in America, they said you can't do all of this. They talking to me about drill music. And I'm like, wait, did you just come out the how to, you know,
that,
wow, we can't get caught up, haramifying everybody when you got other people here, they with their family, their parents, and their parents took them, regardless if they listen to drill music.
yeah. I mean, the thing is at the end of the day, you know, teenagers. I mean, young people, they're gonna do what they're gonna do. And so, again, as parents, this is one of the things that, again, our teachers would say this to us, like, at the end of the day, we don't own our children. Like, we can't, force them to do what we want them to do necessarily. But we want to give them the exposure to those things that we know is going to be of good for them. So it could be a situation that, you take your teenagers to go for Umrah, and that could be the means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them a fath. They have some type of experience, they see someone, they see something that just completely changes them. Or it could be, again, a situation where they just feels like, all right, it's not just me. Like, I can be Muslim and still hold on to my way of, living or whatever case may be, for at this moment, and so on and so forth. And so, you know, we just, you know, whatever means that we can expose our children to goodness, you know, that should be that should be something that is a motivating factor for us. Is that whatever good things that we can expose them to, because again, we never know when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may open up their hearts to love the deen even more, and so, and that's what we want to be the case, is that our children, that they love the deen, that they do these things not because we're telling them to do it, but they do it out of their own love and conviction of it. And again, many people, like, there are different times and places where many people have what I'm just going to refer to as a fet, as a opening Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them. Many people, they have their openings in Ramadan, but also many people have their openings on Umrah or Hajj. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows them to go and be in His house, because at the end of the day, if a person is going for Umrah or Hajj, that means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has invited them there. That is Baytullah. That is the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anyone that enters into the haram, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has specifically invited that person. So inshallah, that is a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants something good for them. Whether they understand it right at this moment or not, or whether it's going to be a situation where it's going to be 10 years or 15 years down the line where, that seed finally starts to sprout some fruits. But, trying to put them in, especially because, in America, like, unfortunately, like, there probably are many sacred things in America. It's just that we've been cut off from, the knowledge of it. Whereas as like going to Hajj or Umrah, we know the sacred, like we know, subhanAllah, that's the Kaaba. Subhanallah, you know, that is where Sayyidina Khadija is buried. That is where the Prophet Prophet's house was. That is, this thing and that thing. Like, we know, and not to mention that this is where the righteous are. And one of the things about the righteous is that the one of the famous things that is mentioned is that it could be that you just have one moment with a person that is of the righteous, or that is of the awliya, and that can change your life forever. That, as they say, it's like you can just get one glance from one of the awliya, and it can completely change your life. And it's not to say that it's necessarily literally just a glance, but it's to say that being in the presence of certain people, I know for me personally, I've experienced this. I've been around certain people where, and even from the standpoint of people who are not necessarily known to be scholars or anything like that, but just being in the presence of certain righteous people, like it is just something different about them. It changes you without them even necessarily them doing anything special. I remember a friend of mine, he had wanted me to meet his brother-in-law, and he kept trying to convince me. I was my senior year of college, and I was in the most difficult class during the summer. So I was just like up to my earlobes in work and trying to graduate. And I was like, I don't have any time. Like, I got to get this work done. And he's like, look, I just really want you to meet my brother-in-law. So eventually I was just like, you know what, fine. I'll just, give myself a break and I'll come. And when I met him, I was just like in complete shock. I'm like, what is it about this guy? Like, he hasn't done anything special. He's not like he was quoting off a whole bunch of hadith or anything. Like, it was just being in his presence, you just like, he's not normal. But it's like one of those things like it's hard to kind of articulate in terms of words, but it's like if you've ever experienced it, you know. It's like if a person's ever been in the presence of the awliya, if they've been in the presence of those who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you just know. It's just like there's something about them, there's a feeling that you get from them, even if they don't say anything special or they don't do anything special. It's just being next to them is just enough. And it's just like, whatever he got, I want that. Like, because that's how it felt to me. It's like, look, I don't know what it is that you got, but whatever it is, I want that. And so, what better place to be in than the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have the possibility of meeting the likes of those individuals. So, definitely, like, if whether they want to come willingly or kicking and screaming, like, you don't
Shukran,
complain.
brother. Shukran. I got emotional, but thank you for making me laugh. Alhamdulillah. Appreciate it.
Alhamdulillah. Now I have to see what time is Maghrib, because Maghrib is going to be coming in soon, at least here. Uh, Today is the 17th of May, right? Yeah, so Maghrib is going to be, it's about 7 minutes away. Okay, so a little bit more time. Tamam. So maybe what we'll do is that we'll just go until like 8:20. So we'll just kind of like end early, and that will be like our Maghrib break, so to speak. But we'll just like kind of end it. So we'll go for about another 10 minutes, inshallah. And then we'll end there and we'll go for Maghrib. And then also for those who also are on the East Coast and are gonna need to pray Maghrib, at least where I am right now in my country, Pennsylvania, the sky is looking pretty clear. So this would also be a great chance for people to see if they can go out and possibly spot the hilal on their own. There's a great blessing in going out and trying to spot the hilal for the different months, and particularly this is going to be the sacred month of Dhul Hijjah. And so for those who may not be familiar with like a general way, like I'll be the first to say, like, I'm not like a professional moon sighter. Like, like some of my teachers, I'm sure he doesn't mind me mentioning this. Like, for example, Ustadh Mohammed Mendez, he's one of my teachers. Like, anyone that knows him personally, that like, that like he is serious about moon sighting. Like, he is serious about the Hijri calendar. I can give you stories about like even conversations that I've had with him about the Hijri calendar. But in any case, so I'm not on that level, so to speak. But just as a general way of trying to spot the hilal is that if you're ever looking for the hilal, one of the general things that you can do is that if you know the direction of the prayer, so for example, if the prayer direction is this way. So like I'm not pointing at anyone specific, but like if the prayer direction is this way, what you're going to do is that you're going to turn in the opposite direction and look up and to the right a little bit, kind of where you can see the light of the sun starting to set, and that is where you're going to try to look for the new moon. So there's, like I said, this is not like the technical, detailed way of spotting the moon. I'm a part of a WhatsApp group where like, these are like real professionals. Like they'll tell you about like, what time the moon is supposed to set and what angle it's at in their location and so on and so forth. I'm not at that level, but just in general, just trying to follow the sunnah that whatever the direction of the prayer is, turn in the opposite direction and a little bit to the right or so, where the sun is setting, and try to look in that general direction to see if you might be able to spot the new moon. I don't remember how easy it is. Like it's considered to be that it's going to be fairly easy to spot the moon. I just don't remember how easy they said it was going to be.
It's the
Um,
only moon, right? I mean, right? So you look, it's the only moon. Like if we're looking opposite.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is that so this is going to be the crescent moon, and so but the thing is that with the crescent moon, it's a very slim. It's very slim. I'm just making up words now. It's a very thin slither of the moon, so
Mm,
it's not as easy to spot. So that's
mm,
why you try to make sure that you're looking at least in the general right direction, because even like when you're able to see it, sometimes like you really got to kind of like squint to be able to see it. And then also, it doesn't necessarily last that long.
mm.
So, um, so that's why it's like, just so like you're not just looking off, you're not just looking off into the distance, completely in the wrong direction. Uh, you you want to make sure that at least you're looking in the right direction. And so for today, yeah, so they're saying that it's easily visible with the naked eye in pretty much all of North America. So if you have clear skies tonight, it's considered that it should be easily visible. So like I said, I don't know how it is for everyone that's online right now, but uh, um, I know for me, it's pretty clear. So if it's clear by you, if you turn in the opposite direction of the direction of the prayer, then inshallah you may be able to see the moon for Dhul Hijjah, and that will begin the specific times for the Hajj, because the time for Hajj actually begins from the month of Shawwal. That technically speaking, a person can make their intention to enter into a state of ihram for Hajj in the month of Shawwal. Like most people don't do it just because it'd be hard to keep up a state of ihram for that long. But the Hajj months are actually Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah. Dhul Hijjah is always singled out because the major rites of the Hajj take place in Dhul Hijjah. And that's the bulk of people, that's when they're going to enter into a state of ihram.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you go over the dates, like when we should start fasting? I know it's optional.
Yeah. So
Um, yeah.
So the recommended times to fast the most emphasized is Yom Arafah. So that's going to be the ninth of Dhul Hijjah. So based upon the very strong likelihood that tomorrow is going to be the first of Dhul Hijjah, that will make Yom Arafah next Tuesday. So
Mm-hmm.
next Tuesday is going to be the 26th of May. Is that right? Did I get that right? Next Tuesday, the 26th of May.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So next Tuesday would be the ninth of Dhul Hijjah. So that would be the most recommended day to fast. However, it's also recommended to different degrees. Some scholars say that it's basically just like a general sunnah. Some say that it's not as strong of evidence to say that it's necessarily general sunnah, but still something good to do to fast all 9 days. So basically, it would be a situation of starting from tomorrow and just fasting all the way up until Tuesday. Um, However, like we mentioned earlier, um, the fast would have to stop on Tuesday. So the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th of Dhul Hijjah, which would be next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, that's haram to fast those days. You're not allowed to fast those days. It'll be impermissible to fast those days. That's the day of Eid and the Ayyam Tashriq, the 3 days after Eid. And so it's haram to fast those days, but any other days outside of that, you can opt to fast. Also, the talbiyah, the takbirat, would also start on the day of Arafah. The saying of Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, walillahil hamd. To say the takbirat after every obligatory prayer. Again, the scholars they differ about the ruling of it. Is it emphasized sunnah? Is it an obligation? The scholars say differ about it, but it's something that a person should not miss. That will start on Tuesday, which would be Yom Arafah. And you will continue to do that up until the last day of the day of Tashriq at Asr. And so these are all things to keep in mind in terms of some of the rights, even for those of us who are not going to be able to go on Hajj this year, that these are some of the rights to keep in mind as these blessed days are upon us. So they
You
talk.
make your intention, like you say, I intend to fast for the 9 days or 8 days or
Yes.
7. Okay.
So for a supererogatory fast, according to both, for example, the Shafi school and the Hanafi school, the intention can be made the day of. So as long as the person has not done anything to break their fast, they can make the intention to fast a sunnah fast um, the day of the fast itself, all the way up until like right before the time of Dhuhr.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
so basically, any time between Maghrib and right before Dhuhr of that actual day, as long as you haven't done anything to break your fast, you can make your intention. Um, um, you can make your intention, and for the Shafis and the Hanafis, you would make the intention for each individual day. And so just every individual day, you would just make the intention of fasting for those days. But again, the emphasis would be on Yom Arafah.
Okay.
And then the takbirat will start from Fajr on the Yom Arafah. So that would be more than likely next Tuesday. And again, you would go until the last day of the day of Tashriq, which is going to be the 13th. So basically, Tuesday, so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So Saturday at Asr would be the last. So basically, from Tuesday at Fajr to Saturday at Asr, you would do the takbirat.
So you're
So
gonna
that
be doing it during Eid? You're gonna still be doing it during, because Eid will be
so
what,
yeah,
that Friday and
so you would do it for Eid, but in particular, we're talking about the takbirat that you would actually be saying this after every obligatory prayer. So
Okay.
starting at Fajr on Yom Arafah, so basically next Tuesday at Fajr, all the way up until Saturday at Asr. So you start on Fajr, so it'll be next Tuesday at Fajr time, all the way up until Saturday at Asr time. After every obligatory prayer, you will say the takbirat. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Walillahi alhamd. And you say it 3 times. And so that would be done from Tuesday at Fajr time all the way up until Saturday at Asr time. Um, and so, these are some of the main sunan, and then of course the aspect of Ibn Qarbani that we talked about earlier, and just making sure that if you're planning to do a sacrifice, you're planning on doing a Qarbani, that you avoid cutting or trimming your hair or your nails until your animal is slaughtered. But yeah, so these are some of the recommended actions.
Okay. And if you can't do all 9 days, that's like do Derek Arafat, but like what if you only do like 5 or 7 days
That's
of
fine.
fasting? Okay.
So the thing is that the ulama, even like, so outside of Arafah, the other 8 days, the ulama, they differ about even the strength of the recommendation. Like
Mm,
some of the ulama say that because there's a narration that mentions that Aisha radiallahu anha had said that the Prophet Muhammad said them, basically didn't fast these days. And so the ulama, they've interpreted it in different ways. So some have said that it's not a strong sunnah, meaning that, it's still something recommended, but it's just not a strong recommendation. Some have said that it's not necessarily a sunnah at all, but it's still something good to do just because these are blessed days. So like,
mhm,
yeah, so there's difference of opinion. So so basically what you can say is that the 8 days before Yom Arafah, the emphasis is not as strong.
mm,
So if you're able to, many ulama, they consider it to be a good thing. Some of them say it is still sunnah, and they have their different interpretations of the narration of Aisha radiallahu anha. But it's just that, again, the emphasized day is Yom Arafah.
Okay. Shukran.
F1. Tamam. طيب. So inshallah we will stop here, and so if you're able to, I would definitely recommend to go look for the new moon. Inshallah, I plan to go look for the new moon. Inshallah, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you in this blessed month of Dhul Hijjah, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your amal salih, your good works, and may He allow for you to reach Yawm Eid in a better state than you were previous, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from you your sacrifices if you are going to be sacrificing, and early Eid Mubarak if we are not going to see or hear from one another before then. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. الله سبحانه وتعالى أعلم حسبنا النعم وكيل. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran.